coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Conservatives make this big mistake all the time, which is we push back the left and then we think we've won. Now we can go back to just, doing whatever it is we like to do.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point of the left is to go too far. That's why they do it. They know they're going too far because they need to see where the limits are. This is like what Lenin said, like push forward and basically keep going till you hit bone, and then you stage a strategic retreat. So the left likes to know where the limits are so they can go back and prepare and then get ready to push back again. And then the right is always surprised when, the enemy has been doing politics all this time and we've just kind of been like, doing barbecues and making money and going to church or whatever it is that conservatives like to do, like live their life as a free American, unaware that the leftist enemy is basically plotting to strangle them in their beds.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and dance-themed resistance editor at the American Mind. I am joined this week by managing editor Mike Sabo, publisher and president Ryan Williams, and back again by ever-popular demand, Seth Barron. Very excited to dive into a bunch of juicy topics, starting with Mr. Vance Goes to Germany. So you probably saw over the weekend that J.D. Vance, otherwise known as the Vice President of the United States, traveled to Munich in Germany for a security summit. This speech that he gave was immediately preceded by one of these horrible carjackings in which an Afghan national plowed into the crowd. At least 30 people were hurt, and this, I suspect, prompted a slight pivot, or at least a re-emphasis in Vance's speech. I assume he was already planning basically to take this tack, but he really drilled into his message that Europe has completely lost its way. This was nominally a speech about the war in Ukraine and international relations, but Vance basically said the real threat, the deep threat, is from within, emphasizing illegal immigration, threats to free speech, all of the things that we have touched upon on this podcast a number of times, and calling upon the nations of Europe basically to reconnect with their deep principles, that is, their ancestral values, and I think evoking the notion of the West, capital W, saying America wants to be in partnership with Europe, wants to share those values from which we derive our kind of American ideals, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, but that those things are under threat or even perhaps have been forgotten, abandoned by Europe's present leadership, thinking of not just Germany, but the UK as well. This was greeted with horror and outrage from the predictable parties. German leaders called it unacceptable, disgusting, all sorts of nasty names. The room itself was, I would say, quite muted. There was sort of a shocked silence that seems to have predominated during a lot of the speech. But back home, not only Musk, but Trump himself said this was a great move. So this seems like it seems like there's a lot of support coming from the administration. No rifts between Trump and this vice president or Musk anytime soon. What do you guys make of this speech? Why now? What sort of effect, if any, do you think it will have in Europe? And was it intended to have an effect on Europe, or was it more to do with internal signaling and American politics back home?
Yes. And yes, maybe no to one of those. Anyway, yeah, The audience for this is interesting because I'm not the first to comment on this because we only do one podcast a week and everyone's talking about it. But if you watch the speech, it was clear that the reception to it in the room was cool. The biggest applause was at the beginning when Vance just said, we have great sympathy with you for this horrible attack. And, our thoughts and prayers are with you. And I love Germany. I visited Munich a few times and my wife and I love it. So after that throat clearing and expression of sympathy, Vance moved into the substance of the speech, which was very critical, as you said, Spencer, of the tendency and trajectory of quote unquote democracy, at least elite run democracy in Germany and throughout Western Europe. So I think he knew he wasn't really speaking. Well, he knew that whole presentation would go over like a turd in a punch bowl at that conference. You're supposed to just go there, hobnob, talk about security, be very diplomatic. And instead he criticized the slide, as he put it, the anti-democratic slide of recent years in Europe. And then coupled with, there was this 60 Minutes piece where I'm sure you guys saw it, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners have too, where they went to Germany and interviewed some prosecutors about sort of the hate speech laws in Germany. And you have these 3 German prosecutors kind of giggling smugly, or at least kind of knowingly giggling, and a little jovial when they're asked by a sort of incredulous, I forget, Seth probably knows, but who was the host of that 60 Minutes segment? Doesn't matter. But she said, "So can you get arrested in Germany for insulting someone on the street?" And, "Oh, yes, yes. But online you can get arrested and fined for doing it online." "Oh, yes, sometimes even more." And she said, "Oh, why is that?" Well, because on the internet, on the street, it's just once. That's a terrible German accent. I apologize. But online, it lives there forever. So we have to fine you more. And the whole
Are they
tone of
Canadians? Is Europe full of Canadians? Is that it?
we'll fine you more. No, I don't know.
Ryan's just got a general sort of like wimpy English speaking accent.
Yeah.
So Canadians, Scandinavians, Europeans.
So, and then Vance then also went to meet with the AFD, or the leaders of the AFD. So, I mean, the whole thing delivered together was him tossing some red meat, but also some substantive talking points, I think, to the populist movement, not only in Germany, but across Western Europe and Central Europe. And I think it's well overdue. So if you take the immigration question in these countries, it's exploded since Merkel opened the gates after the Syrian debacle. And they all had problems before, but the problems are now much more accelerated. So the fate of free Europe is very much in question, I would say, over the next couple of generations. And you take immigration and then layer on top of it the ruling class's response to their citizens complaining about the immigration. All these stats are coming out. If you look at the disparities in violent crime and rapes by natives in, say, Sweden or Germany versus the recent imported peoples from the greater MENA area and Middle East, it's shocking and glaringly obvious the problem they're dealing with. And if you raise a stink about it as a allegedly free citizen of one of these countries, the Stasi shows up at your door and takes your phone and fines you a bunch of money. This is a troubling development, to say the least. And obviously, the solution to it is not to arrest your citizens and to try to ban parties that may speak to the concerns of your citizens. So, all very welcome news. I mean, none of the substance of it was a surprise, but the unusual thing about it, and it's been what's been refreshing about these 2 Trump administrations, is sort of speaking plain truths to our putative allies across the pond about how to run a small r Republican form of government and institutions. And they're as bad as we think things are here, with all the lawfare in recent years and the attack on Trump and the persecution of right wingers of various milder forms, usually than Germany. We have it pretty good still in America. So the comparative power of the speech was good, and I think should impress upon American citizens how good we still have it, despite all our problems, compared to Western Europe, which seems on the slippery slope towards some sort of Islamic authoritarianism. Although in the meantime, you'll get kind of transatlantic bureaucratic managerial totalitarianism.
Another funny data point in this, more about the way the American left or legacy media is responding, was Margaret Brennan's discussion with Marco Rubio, where she said, listen, you have to think about the fact that J.D. Vance was saying this in a country where the weaponization of free speech led to genocide. And I have to say, Marco Rubio is sharp. And he was like, I completely disagree with your premise. It was not free speech that led to the genocide in Nazi Germany. It was fascism and racism. There were no opposition parties under the Nazis. There was no free speech. And then, this whole idea, I guess, of what they call the Weimar fallacy, this idea that, Weimar Germany was just too tolerant and didn't do anything to stop the Nazis. But in fact, they were constantly shutting down their newspapers and arresting them and all of that stuff. I think that the speech really is another indication of Europe's growing irrelevance. And it's sad to say, but it's growing irrelevance to global politics. Trump is not planning to include Europe in the discussions to end the Ukraine war. He's not even including Ukraine, but it occurred to me, why should he include Ukraine? It's our war. Like, we're the ones who decide whether Ukraine can keep going or not because we're funding it. He obviously doesn't want to get Europe involved in the reconstruction of Gaza. And, I saw this interview with this, I didn't even know what had happened in Romania. Are you guys up on this? Like that last year, end of the year, essentially the Romanian Supreme Court, under pressure from Brussels, canceled or negated a whole election because the right wing was winning.
Yeah.
And some top, European Parliament guy on TV recently, the other day, he was like, look, we did it in Romania. We'll do it in Germany if necessary.
Yeah.
You can't have these parties in charge. I guess that's what J.D. Vance said. He said, look, if your democracy can be overturned by a couple $100,000 in social media posts, then it's not really a democracy to begin with. And we're not interested in supporting you if that's where you're going. It's very interesting, but I definitely think I think it's like a major shift. Europe is just becoming really more and more irrelevant.
Well, it's one of those things that's obvious to everybody. And if somebody who is not JD Vance says it, everybody's like, oh, yes, this is a very, very big problem. It's kind of akin to when you get these. There's a line. This is kind of a deep cut, but there's a line in a Sally Rooney novel. Sally Rooney is this beloved darling of kind of woke lit light, gentle communism for wine mom novels. I actually really kind of enjoy them, just a side note, but that's because I'm a wine mom at heart. And anyway, there's a line in it somewhere where one of her characters is look, all of this woke literature is just totally inadequate to meet our moment. And it's all, you can hear it being cackled over by wine sipping, insipid, middle-aged ladies or something to that effect. Something that if you said that on a right-wing podcast would get you called a hideous cretin, these sexist ages, and in fact,
and if you said it in Germany, you get arrested.
You would literally, right, they would beat your door down. And when Alex Perez made the same point in a literary magazine, because he's a conservative, he was hounded out of town. So it really matters who's saying this stuff. And everybody in Germany and Europe more generally knows that the countries of Europe have for a long time been overwhelmed by totally unsustainable levels of immigration, and that there are certain predictable outcomes of this, which a perfectly non-racist but reality-based individual might observe. But Vance is saying it, so it's hateful and Trumpist and wrong. And also, I think, Seth, what you're saying is the kind of the underlying subtext of the situation is that, well, if America is now willing to admit this, they can actually do something about it. It's one thing to write an essay about it in Der Spiegel or whatever. It's another thing for the second in command of the U.S. executive to say, well, either kind of get back on track, or we're going to look elsewhere for the allies of the true West. And Europe is in huge trouble if, in fact, that's the direction that geopolitics is kind of forcing us to move. One other thing I would just add that's kind of funny, a friend of mine pointed this out, is like, this is the sort of thing that European politicians do to Americans all the freaking time. This is like the signal feature of European appearances abroad, is for some bureaucrat to stand up and lecture Americans about all of the things that are doing wrong. I literally just Googled like Angela Merkel criticizes America, and it got like, 10 different Reuters news pieces dating back to the Obama years about all the kinds of corruption that Merkel was denouncing and all the things she was saying about like the end of American virtue and so forth. So that's perfectly fine because everybody knows nobody's going to pay any attention to that. And only sort of like the Beltway circles are going to like swirl their wine glasses and say, ah, yes, we really are terrible. And geopolitics is going to continue as normal. But when JD Vance makes like deep substance level critiques of Europe, that's deep doo-doo, because that means that actually American foreign policy might react and shift accordingly, the way Seth's talking about.
Yeah, I think, and that phenomenon is, I mean, so likened to, it just immediately pops into my head, Shelby Steele writing on white guilt over and over again. And this is just like international guilt. You have the DC elite who love to hear this stuff. They love to say this stuff. I mean, John Kerry during the Biden administration was talking about, our First Amendment gets in the way of what we really need to do. And he obviously wanted the European dream here at home. The only problem is, that pesky Constitution is still there. The First Amendment text is still there. You could go, Soviet Constitution in 1917, where, yeah, they had free speech rights and whatever on paper, but obviously the truth was the absolute opposite of that. But that's what these people kind of seem to want. I mean, just kind of formalism, stuff written in the law. But what actually happens is they win, you lose. It is about hierarchy at the end of the day. It's not about kind of high principles or anything like that. And it's just basically keeping their power going, keeping the EU going, keeping the money flowing.
Yeah, we have some somewhat breaking news from about 3 hours ago, but Vance sat down with our friend Raheem Kassam at the National Pulse and attacked Zelensky. I'll just read a few quotes because they touch on some of these themes. Zelensky's getting really bad advice, and I don't know from whom. He's not dealing with Joe Biden and the Biden administration anymore. He's dealing with Donald Trump and the Trump administration. The idea that he's going to litigate his disagreements with the president in the public square. You, Raheem, know the president very well. Obviously, I know the president very well. This is not a good way to deal with President Trump. Of course, the Ukrainians are going to have their perspective. The way to surface that is in a private discussion with American diplomats. He's attacking the only reason this country exists publicly right now, and it's disgraceful. And it's not something that's going to move the president of the United States. And then interestingly, on elections in Ukraine, Raheem says elections in Ukraine are now U.S. policy, with Vance making it clear that Zelensky must submit to a democratic mandate if he wants continued legitimacy. Certainly that would give him the strongest position, Vance said. And I think it's a little rich for some of our European friends to attack Donald Trump for suggesting that Ukraine should have elections when they say that this is a war for democracy. So it's sort of a nice little follow-up to the lecture Vance gave in Munich.
It's occurring to me as we're talking about this that actually this picks up perfectly where we just had to leave off at the very end of the last episode, which was by mentioning some of Pete Hegseth's recent comments on Ukraine. Obviously now Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, basically just saying we've got to bring an end to this thing and fast. We didn't really have time to dig into those remarks, but they obviously signal kind of in the same vein, just a total about face in American foreign policy, which does make me feel, it can't be helped, but it makes me feel a certain regret and sadness over how confusing we must be to our allies and just to the world generally. I mean, in some ways, this is a sign that our democracy actually has a certain vitality to it that these European democracies don't, that we're capable of electing radically different administrations. And that's always been a feature of American politics. But the Biden administration was so irresponsible, especially in this domain. I know we love to talk about the culture stuff and the domestic stuff, but the Afghanistan withdrawal, the war in Ukraine breaking out on his watch, and in part, I think, as a result of his weakness. Obviously, the kind of emboldening of China and Iran and the Houthis and just like on and on and on. And obviously, the right thing to do under those circumstances is to immediately reverse course and take a stronger line. But, you know, everybody, I think, over the course of 4 years kind of settled into this new normal where the global hegemon of the last generation is like a void. And so there's a lot of now, I think, kind of ugly cleaning up to do that. Yeah, it must just be kind of bizarre for other countries to watch like the most important country in the world totally change its policies.
We talked in recent weeks about the transformation of USAID after the end of the Cold War into a vehicle for kind of left wing cultural imperialism, whereas it used to putatively stand for the backing of free speech and American values, as opposed to Soviet values and the spread of communism. So it's kind of, in a way, Trump and Vance are restoring the original sort of anti-totalitarian message across to the free peoples of Europe who are being oppressed by their governments. But now the opponent is not the Soviet Union, but the transatlantic kind of NATOist alliance that sort of grew in power post Cold War, but has taken on the kind of values and imperialism of leftism at home in America and in Western Europe. So it's been an interesting 40 years.
Yeah, it's becoming a theme of ours this year that after decades and generations of decline, restoration seems radical, even though technically it is a return and a necessary one to kind of the actual status quo, the ideal. Well, in any case, this is obviously a set of issues that is not going away anytime soon. I found this a really interesting conversation, more
Yeah.
interesting actually than I expected. Um,
I have just one last funny thing to interject, Spencer, from our good old friend Matt Peterson. Legacy journalism, and then he has a fake quote. But would you go back in time and kill baby James Madison so he never writes the First Amendment to stop Hitler?
That's pretty
Love
good.
to do a poll of the press, just to see.
Right.
Give them privacy. How would they actually vote on that? I'm sure the results would be interesting.
We do need one of those like best friend memes. I forget what it's called, where the muscular white arm and the muscular black arm are like bound together, and it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the far right, the far left, the Weimar fallacy.
Right.
Like, we all
Right.
think that Weimar is good.
Carl
Anyway,
Weathers, Schwarzenegger coming together. Yep.
yeah. That's what it is. All right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, this topic has now officially reached max capacity for obscure internet references, so we need to move on. And now, live from DC, it's the Resistance 2.0. This time, it's flaccid and corpulent. Well, let's start with my favorite because I'm hosting, so I get to decide. There is now, I hesitate to call it a movement. There's sort of a dusting of demonstrations across the country in protest of Donald Trump. I remember when everyone kind of looked around at the end of election night this time around and said, "Well, brace yourselves because the pussy hats are coming back out and the women's march is going to take to the streets yet again." But in fact, due to a number of factors, including I think just being kind of all rioted out, but also, I think that Trump has a much clearer mandate this time around and has been elected a second time after a relentless smear campaign. It just seems clear that resistance in the full scale kind of way that we used to have just ain't going to fly. That, however, did not stop protesters at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, which was recently overhauled by Trump with the installation of Rick Grinnell as acting head and the #erasure of the year-round rainbow lights. That didn't stop protesters from gathering outside the Kennedy Center to enact protest through dance. NPR reports that 34 dancers performed the Nelkin Line, a piece by choreographer Pina Bausch that pays homage to the seasons. It's been performed widely since Bausch created it in 1982. There's even a tutorial. Dear listeners, not even I, reader of Sally Rooney, noted enjoyer of lib culture, not even I had heard of Pina Bausch's The Nelkin Line, but apparently enough people had to make it worthy of an act of protest. There are slightly more serious rumblings in this same vein going on. New York Times reported that thousands took to the streets of New York City to protest what they called a constitutional crisis. The reasons why that particular phrases in the air have been covered on this podcast before. It's got to do with Musk being somehow an unelected king. Mike Solana, one of my favorite reporters writing for Pirate Wires, points out that there's a real effort to portray this in the press as something serious. But he says we all had a good laugh at the original Women's March, but that first march was over 3 million people strong. Anti-Trump sentiment is, despite implications to the contrary, just nowhere near those levels today. And that does seem to be the story here, making it particularly amusing and delicious. One more data point to throw in here before we start talking about it as a group is the professional side of things. Obviously, Trump and Musk have been trying to get a lot of resignations, have been firing where they can, a lot of government employees. There are also protest resignations. One notable one was covered by Molly Hemingway of The Federalist recently. Danielle Sassoon resigned from the DOJ's Southern District in New York rather than complying with the new DOJ policy against weaponized investigations and prosecutions. Molly points out, first of all, that this is hardly a virtuous and principled stance when Sassoon did not refuse to comply when the DOJ did Russiagate, false FISA warrants, cartoonish over-prosecution of J6ers, Mar-a-Lago raid, refusing to enforce border laws, etc. But her big point is that this person who is portraying herself or being portrayed as a kind of principled libertarian, in fact, has only the most distant possible connections with conservative organizations like the Federalist Society, and instead was hired into SDNY by Preet Bharara, according to the Times. And Bharara is a big proponent, Molly points out, of Democrat lawfare against Trump and other Republicans. So even the never Trump so-called conservatives are kind of astroturfed, it would seem. I don't know. Tell me, you guys, if I'm underselling this or if there's something kind of more worth paying attention to here. It really does seem like a kind of history repeating itself as
Badly.
farce. But badly, yeah. You think so?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is something I was kind of obsessed with, like leading up to the election and after the election. And I wrote a little bit about it. Like, what is the resistance going to do? Will Trump and the new Trump administration be up to countering it? And I guess in a way, I needn't have worried so much. I mean, I think what this reflects is the fact that the Democrats have they have no center, they have no leadership. You know, Obama, like the Kamala Harris debacle and the whole Joe Biden debacle completely destroyed the center of the Democrat Party. Like, who is their leader now? I mean, Hakeem Jeffries is trying to put himself forward, but I mean, he's terrible. He and Chuck Schumer both. It's weird. So they've shifted the center of the Democrat Party from the Bay Area to Brooklyn. But it doesn't have the same kind of oomph here. Hakeem Jeffries is always trying to sort of be a kind of street fighter. He's like, I call Trump Captain Chaos. That's his new bid, but none of it sticks. So it's just really interesting how the tone is completely different. They got so used, I think, to like being able to marshal all of their forces against Trump. And I think they just took it for granted that they could like manipulate the populace.
Right.
But then the people sort of rejected all of their lawfare. They rejected the Russiagate insinuations. So now they're kind of stuck with nothing. And what's weird is like they seem to be doubling down on centering Black women's voices, which, you know, for the last 8 years is like something we hear about all the time. Stacey Abrams saved America twice. She is Captain America. Like we owe Black women a vote of thanks. But the thing is, the more you center that demographic, you know, the more you kind of turn off everybody else. But now Jasmine Crockett, like that lunatic congresswoman from Houston, she's announced her plans to run for president. And people are like, yeah, go. You got to do it. I don't know if you saw these clips of these Black congresswomen just talking about Black girl magic and Trump and Musk, just these mediocre white men who can't deal with like black women excellence. I mean, Tish James had a whole thing this week about black girl magic. I've heard her talk about that before. It's just, who loves that? Who does that appeal to outside of them?
You don't understand, Seth. True ethno-narcissism has never been tried.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and Seth, I actually wanted to ask you, so there's an interesting thing going on with the whole like Eric Adams corruption case and all that. What's kind of your take on that? Is there anything there? Trump's DOJ is obviously trying to close the case, but then there's obviously a lot of pushback. What's your take overall on that?
Well, my take is that there's people in New York City politics who hate Eric Adams because he beat all of the, he's a cop. He's a former cop. Now, he made his whole career as a cop suing the NYPD. So he's not like really like a cop's cop. But nevertheless, he's not going to be all in favor of defunding the police. So there's that, and people hate him for that. The people pushing for his removal now are mostly, they're basically, I mean, some of them are running for mayor, so they're his opponents. Is what he did good? Like taking upgrades on Turkish Air after doing favors, some kind of small favors for the Turkish consulate? I mean, no, it's sleazy. Is it a federal case? Should he be removed from office? No, there's an election in a few months. We can deal with it. They're terrified that he's going to win. And if he doesn't win, Cuomo is going to jump in. So that's, these people want like full on socialism. I mean, I have a piece today in City Journal about there's this rich kid, Muslim socialist, who wants to double the minimum wage and set up city-owned grocery stores and arrest Bibi Netanyahu. I mean, this is like his platform. So this is the level at which we're talking, versus Eric Adams or Cuomo, or even, who are just kind of like more mainstream Democrats in the traditional mode, who aren't like crazed ideologues. So I think that's sort of what's going on. I don't think Kathy Hochul will remove him, because that would be a disaster for her electorally, because she also has to face an election.
Yeah. Has anybody written a piece about this, about the Kathy Hochul, Eric Adams thing called The Ice Queen and the Turkish Delights? That's lore right there. But I feel, I guess, like semi-vindicated for having at some point written a piece called All Rioted Out, in which I suggested that the left had just fully shot its wad on this. And Seth, you're illuminating a part of it that I hadn't really thought about, since I'm always so fixated on cultural stuff. It seems clear to me that woke has just really backfired, and also is a Chinese finger trap, because once you're in it, not only have you staked out a maximalist position, you've also declared that anything less than that maximalist position is tantamount to genocide. So you actually can't backtrack. You can't be like, oh, just kidding. Maybe we shouldn't cut off toddlers' balls, because, like you just said, that anybody who objects to cutting off toddlers' balls is literally Hitler. So now you're literally Hitler if you walk back your stance. So anyway, that has long been apparent to me, and I think it is one reason, besides just the like utter distastefulness of some of these policies, it's one reason why woke has fizzled. But as you're noting, Seth, it's also the full court press on the media control, and it's just the dialing up every possible outlet to 11, going all in for Russiagate, like all of that stuff. Just kind of they kind of broke their toys, and now they don't work anymore, but they don't have any other toys. This is the subject of a really great cover piece, which I will plug in my capacity as the also CRB guy on this podcast. The new issue is, I got a cover piece by Bill Vogley. I think the headline we gave it is "Now What," which is probably Bill's headline. But it's just about like kind of hopelessness of the Democrats' current position. Not that we should rest on our laurels or it'll be that way forever or anything like that. There's always figure out some way to kind of come back around, but never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. And as far as I'm concerned, like sprinkle on that black girl magic.
Let me just point out one thing, and this is something that I just think conservatives make this big mistake all the time, which is we push back the left and then we think we've won. Now we can go back to just, doing whatever it is we like to do. But the whole point of the left is to go too far. That's why they do it. They know they're going too far because they need to see where the limits are. This is like what Lenin said, like push forward and basically keep going till you hit bone, and then you stage a strategic retreat. So the left likes to know where the limits are so they can go back and prepare and then get ready to push back again. And then the right is always surprised when, the enemy has been doing politics all this time, and we've just kind of been like, doing barbecues and making money and going to church or whatever it is that conservatives like to do, like live their life as a free American, unaware that the leftist enemy is basically plotting to strangle them in their beds.
Yeah, and that's why I'm glad. I mean, this time, you looked at what Trump is doing now. I mean, look at compared to 2017. I mean, okay, it was a tax cut. Every Republican president was going to do something like that. Like, this is very, very different because I think, Seth, like, Trump understands the deep state. He understands the regime. He understands what liberalism is at its core. Even if he can't, talk about it in some technical way, that doesn't even matter. He understands what liberals are, obviously, living in New York City, being around them 24/7. So he just gets this in a way, I feel like, in a way that he just did not previously. So it gives me a lot of hope. But, like you said, Democrats are going to come back with a vengeance at some point. New leaders are going to rise, certainly with them too, just as, the old ones are kind of going away, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, no, definitely have to take them seriously for sure.
I encourage everyone to read Bill's piece when it comes out, because it's, as Bill usually is, it's analytical and careful. And he says, this always happens after an election loss. You have this tendency of fingers to be pointed all around, but no one really to get blamed. You have a tendency to get back to the base, but that's always in tension with a correction that may improve your electoral prospects going forward, especially when you've overcorrected too far to the left or to the right. Of course, right here, he's talking about the left. So I think it should be good news to us that the loudest voices out of the gate are the hysterical women on left-wing mainstream media, coupled with the kind of slovenly, blue-haired crowd in alliance with sort of woke, racialist, ethno-narcissists, Spencer, as you said. The leadership of the Democratic Party, needs to do another third way shift or pivot, and it doesn't seem like there's much appetite for it at the moment. And the people getting the airtime are the people you precisely want to shut up and go regroup while the adults figure out how to win the next election. And the midterms are on our doorstep already, as is usually the case. So I think if I were the Trump comms operation, one of my major top 3 goals would be to elevate and provoke the left wing of the Democrats in all of its instantiations for the next year and a half.
You're saying that the Trump administration needs to center Black trans women. That should become our policy now.
We should, maybe they can make July. No, not July, because the 4th of July is in there. It would just be too sacrilege. But maybe August can be Black Girl Magic Month. To it up.
I will say that when all of this Kennedy Center stuff started happening, I was doing a little research into the Trump's kind of arts policies, and I guess he disbanded one of these presidential councils that Biden had rebanded after they had disbanded themselves in protest to Trump. And the current head of this organization is a woman who worked previously for the Smithsonian on restorative history. And I started digging on her, and she had an article literally arguing that Black History Month needs to be year round. So I think that person should become the White House press secretary. Just unambiguous. We should just tap this person. And then, I'm all for it. It does. I think they're trying to make Hassan Piker a thing now. That's slightly.
It's either Joe Rogan. That's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and that was absurd. I mean, that whole thing. We need our Joe Rogan. It's like, of course, they had their Joe Rogan. He was Joe Rogan. And they totally disgusted him and repulsed him. But Piker's a talented guy. I don't know if you guys have listened to him a lot. He's also posting a lot of shirtless pictures these days, which is like a smart move politically for the audience he's trying to capture. So that's like that. When they start talking about that, it makes me like a little bit more nervous. But with these with the like disabled Palestinian fatties for queer liberation or whatever. I mean, that stuff. I just imagine Nancy Pelosi like throwing the landline phone across her office and like hanging her head and drinking and pouring herself another scotch. If these people don't drive the real Democrat operatives insane, I don't know what does.
Yeah, well, it's her bed, and she should lie in it. Of course, we should all remind ourselves of the iconic picture of Pelosi and all the rest kneeling with African scarves on in solidarity with George Floyd and BLM. So it couldn't happen to nicer people, frankly.
Live by the kente cloth, die by the kente cloth, boys. Oh, right. Well, now I really am going to take a victory lap, because last week we were talking about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and all the kind of political fallout from it, and different groups, Democrat groups, kind of accusing Musk of becoming a dictator or something like that. And I speculated off the cuff that public appetite for the DOGE project, in its essence, that is, when you tell people about just wanting to cut a bunch of fat off of the government and being really aggressive about it, I said, I bet the public is champing at the bit for that. And now it turns out I may be correct. Ryan sent me this Newsweek piece about a focus group by Engagius. I suppose that's how you say that.
You gotta love these public opinion consulting firm names.
That's right. I think Engagius was the Samnite god of public opinion, and that's I wish it were that every day. Anyway, they did a focus group, is what I'm trying to say, and I guess 8 of the 11 focus group participants said they approved of Musk's efforts. These were particularly important participants because they're Arizona swing voters who moved from Biden to Trump. So these are exactly the kinds of people, I suppose, that Trump is trying to gratify. And it suggests, along with a few other bits of polling data that have come out recently, it suggests that this is like what the doctor ordered. Obviously, there continue to be all sorts of court challenges to various parts of the DOGE movement, initiative, whatever you want to call it. And there probably are more kind of like coming down the pike as we speak. But this just seems like confirmation that the actual project is not giving anybody, like, is not really making that many people lose sleep. Now, whether it will, all the same questions are kind of still on the table as when we talked about this last time. How much money will they actually be able to cut? Which parts of this are going to get court blocked, et cetera, et cetera? Is the Trump administration actually spoiling for a fight on some of these issues?
Oh, Spencer, I just have to flag a wonderful neologism that just came out of your mouth. Court block. Oh man, we tried to reform the government. We got totally court blocked.
Yeah. Bro, I I got such blue balls because I got court blocked.
Okay,
yeah,
stop
that's, the podcast down. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking because actually I've said everything I have to say, and clearly I've been talking too much. What do you guys think about DOGE and its prospects?
It's fun. I just want to note for the record the series of events that led to this. Elon buys Twitter, fires 70 to 80% of its staff, keeps all the competent autists, basically. And now I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. There are plenty of non-autistic people working in.
They're autistic in spirit.
Back end of tech. That's right. Spiritually autistic.
Spiritual autists, of which I count myself one, I'd say.
Elon himself continues his antics that have always been on Twitter and on X, which is kind of I would say a freewheeling and comedy-focused meme style, which seems to have served him well for his various projects and amuses him quite a bit. And then sort of gets, this leads to what we've talked about before, the reascent of kind of more truth and irreverent, in the best sense, sort of anti-government, anti-Biden administration sharing of information and exposing of things on X. Musk, catches the eye of Trump, but they each sort of like each other. And now he's at DOGE, and he's bringing these autists into government. I hear one report that the education department, the DOGE guys come in and they're all in T-shirts and sort of kind of nerdy. And they must strike. I just love the prospect or the image of these, 20-somethings, sort of techie T-shirt wise, with no respect for official DC administration guy clothing, striking fear and terror into the hearts of bureaucrats. So this is how we got here. I will now channel Seth from 2 weeks ago and say they need to be careful, because moving quickly and breaking things is all well and good, and the bureaucracy certainly needs it. But if I were the Trump team, I would keep a very close eye on what public opinion thinks about what DOGE is doing, and how they're reacting to the headlines is often disingenuous and dishonest as they are coming about the media describing what DOGE is doing. I mean, they're helped by the fact that the mainstream media really can't control this narrative anymore. But you start mucking around in Social Security or Medicaid, for that matter, or even pieces of the education department, not most of it, but pieces of it, and you might start building up a real constituency that starts not to like this. So I'm not saying that that's. I would say that's probably our 20 or 30%, maybe even 40% risk, but it depends on what they get after. So that's one thing that they should be careful about, and keep a tight control on. Now Elon in his various interviews has said, like, we don't do anything without the president's sign off. So maybe, I'm sure Trump is aware of this problem, but he's got some very powerful constituencies, both in the voting public and in certain more elite circles, that he needs to keep inside the tent.
And that's a point that Steve Bannon has brought up too. I mean, Bannon, no fan of Elon Musk at all.
You can call him a filthy immigrant.
Yeah, to say the very least. Yeah, he used definitely some choice language regarding him. So, but he even said, he came out and said, with Medicaid and some of these more entitlement programs, Elon needs to be careful. A lot of MAGA people obviously use those types of programs. So yeah, so he's even made kind of his opinion known there. Musk himself, I know we've talked about this, kind of what is he under? He's this Newsweek report just says he's a special government employee. It's what a White House official told the AP, and does not receive a paycheck. There's still, and I think probably reasonable wonderings about, okay, how does this help him, his business enterprises, that kind of thing. I think the Trump team, comms team, needs to probably keep on top of that. But what also helps the Trump team overall is, they're popular overall. I mean, much more so than the first administration. John Carl from ABC, he noted 63% of Americans want the government to recognize only two sexes, 60% deporting illegal aliens, 60% favoring expanding oil and gas production. So, the American people, by and large, are with Trump, again, in a way that they certainly weren't before. Trump's favorability, just going to real clear politics, 47%. His unfavorability is only 48%. So, that spread is 0.8. That's nothing. JD Vance, kind of same thing, 41% favorable, 42% unfavorable. Obviously, we don't want to put stock, wholly into numbers. There's character. There's men and politicians making historic changes here. It's not just kind of just a spreadsheet. But Trump's kind of got the wind at his sails. He needs to keep it going, but definitely make sure that, Musk is on some type of leash, and that he is, as an employee of the executive branch, working on behalf of Trump and working on behalf of what the administration's trying to do.
Yeah, I would agree. This sort of thing could backfire very quickly if, like, it turns out, they canceled some program for, legless veterans, and now, or some cancer research that has now totally gone wrong. And the other thing is, there is this libertarian delight in making public sector workers, giving them like market discipline, right? And I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and this kind of enthusiasm, like, yeah, fire them all. The thing is, the private sector, like, if you own a company, you can't close down a plant and just say you can't come into work, or evaporate like a unit. Like, there are federal laws that are called the Warren Act that require like 60 days notice, 90 days notice, hearings. There's all kinds of protections. Now, you could argue, well, those regulations shouldn't exist. Maybe, but I'm just saying, like, the government isn't subject to those laws, so they can go and like fire, close down departments or whatever. I'm just saying you can't do that in the private sector. I just want to add one thing though, like about how this all came to be, like Ryan's story. I don't know if this is totally true, but what I gather is one of the reasons why DOGE kind of is able to do what it's doing or even exist is because, and this is just such a great anecdote or example is they basically took over an existing Obama era agency called the United States Digital Service, which after the Obamacare website disaster, they set up to, make it possible for the executive to go into any agency and do things to make them more technologically efficient.
Wow.
And this is the kind of institutional capture that the left has always been expert at. And I'm just so glad to see that people behind the scenes in the Trump team were like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this institution, this law, and use it to, because that way you can just like spread right through the entire administrative state using this vehicle. And that's clearly what they've done. And it's just, if that's what happened, it's brilliant. And I just applaud whoever, whatever brain was behind that. That's exactly, isn't that perfect?
Yeah, it's like a medieval allegory. It's like a little church morality play.
And, I have a friend who works in the government in tech things. And I asked him, what do you know about the U.S. Digital Service? He's like, yeah, I see them at conferences and fairs. They always seem like it's nothing. Like they're desperate to attract talent. Like they didn't have anything going. It was just this zombie sort of organization that the Trump people have enlivened in this, kind of brilliant fashion. So I think that's kind of interesting. Be an interesting test case to write about or something.
Absolutely. There's tons of that stuff lying around. In fact, the Arts Council that I was just mentioning is sort of a small version of that, where, it's sort of like it actually, I think, originates with the Reagan administration. And then it gets co-opted gradually and worn as a skin suit, and then it becomes defunct, and then it gets reappropriated or whatever, that kind of maneuvering is obviously just at a much higher, like 1,000-foot higher level in Trump 2.0 than it was in Trump 1.0. On the other stuff, Mike and Seth too, that you were talking about like Elon's risks and dangers, it actually occurs to me there's a small bit of gossip that we should bring up that we haven't mentioned yet in this connection, which is that Ashley St. Clair says she had just had Musk's babies, another one of Musk's innumerable babies. And this is now touching off all sorts of...
Now a baker's dozen.
Is that right? Did he...
Yeah, 13.
Yeah, 13.
13, yeah. Okay, so this touched off a bunch of little, mainstream debates and rivulets on the side about, should we congratulate Ashley St. Clair? What do we feel about Musk's personal life? Yada, yada. And my own take on it, which is always going to be just dissatisfying, is he do some good things, he do some bad things, he a person, he does, and he's like a big personality, so he does some big good things and some big bad things. There's a great chronicle that Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, but the historian, is fond of citing. This chronicle, I guess it's a medieval chronicle, where somebody writes, this year many things are happening, some of them good, some of them bad. And I definitely think there's all the stuff that you guys are talking about is very real, especially the idea that move fast and break might actually work in tech and not in the government. That's something that the left is talking about a lot now, and they may have a point about that. They do seem like they're kind of finding their footing a little bit. It's going to take some reorientation, but isn't it just maybe the conservative small government analog of the leftist thing that you were just talking about, Seth, where it's you push and you push, and then you hit bone, and then you kind of back off. There's all sorts of perils to it, and of course the left has incurred them and suffered, but I wonder if there's a parallel there, that this is the same kind of strategy. Musk is one among a number of tech giants. He's become so predominant recently, and everybody's talking about him. And obviously, he has the central place in the administration, and he's kind of insofar as one of the tech oligarchs is our tech oligarch. He's obviously our tech oligarch, but there's a huge kind of Götterdämmerung that's still waiting in the wings to happen between Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg and Sam Altman and the effective altruism guys, all of whom, with the exception of, I think, Peter Thiel, has who's Christian and has like a Christian perspective, all of them have some form of like neo theology that is in itself just like incredibly bone chilling. Like it feels like Babel era,
like
Babel hours.
transhumanist type of.
Yes.
I mean, look at Musk has this whole company devoted to putting implants in everybody's brain.
Literal chips in literal brains.
Yeah.
And everybody's sort of like, yeah, based. Like,
Well,
and they yeah.
I just want to give like my little fantasy of how this plays out. I think maybe Trump will do like an MBS or a Putin. And at some point, when the tech oligarchs get on his nerves, he's going to have them all arrested.
Oh my gosh. That'd be a plot twist.
And completely like, reshift the entire balance of power to be like, okay, these guys, they have too much power and I'm taking control. I mean, I don't know. I
abundant free time, Seth. Like if you find 5 minutes to spare on the side of like your constant output, you got to write that novel. That's
it's just kind of a thought I had.
No, yeah, and like they just posted before I came on here one of these videos of their latest robot, and it's some company called like Protoclone or something, and it's literally one of my favorite kind of wag accounts quote tweeted and said, "We have finally succeeded in producing the hominids from Westworld, that cautionary tale."
Uh-huh.
And there's like all of that stuff is simmering under the surface. I think we track it probably more closely than most people do. But at some point, it's like, that and war with China and like all of these like very and a debt crisis, all of those things are still looming while the party is raging. So I guess like watch this space and subscribe to the Roundtable.
I wanted to revive. We'll do this piecemeal and as opportunity arises, but we had a little bit of a groundswell of people saying, "Could you guys recommend stuff again?" We don't need to go through it in a rote way, and everyone recommends an American Mind piece, but I have two recommendations. One sort of diverting. It's this show that was actually released in February of 2020, which I've been enjoying quite a bit and had slipped past my radar somehow. And I've mentioned it, I think, to Spencer and Mike at least, which is this show from the creators of Always Sunny. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, called Mythic Quest on Apple TV. And I'll just read the AI description from Wikipedia, which now pop up whenever you Google anything. Mythic Quest is an American comedy television series created by Charlie Day, Megan Gans, and Rob McElhenney for Apple TV Plus. The show is a workplace sitcom set in the fictional offices of the world's most popular online role-playing game. Now, I will warn our listeners that if you are young Gen X, if you're not young Gen X or younger, it might not be your cup of tea. It's just a world that might not be that familiar to you, but check it out anyway. It's kind of dry, sardonic. It's like The Office meets It's Always Sunny's sort of spiritual humor set in a studio in LA where they produce this epic online role-playing game. But it weaves in a lot of funny themes about the stupidity and vapidity and youth-driven madness of like the online streaming world and the people, I don't know if our boomers know this, but Twitch TV is a huge online product where a lot of the content is you watching other people play video games, and a lot of young commenters on Twitch and elsewhere where they're in this little section of the screen and they're playing and commenting or commenting on those playing. Video game streamers, they are usually playing and commenting at the same time, have gotten, are all worth 10, 12, $15 million because they've found a little niche with a huge audience to make money. So anyway, Mythic Quest, it's a good skewer of that world and is actually quite emotionally poignant at times and very well done. And then I will just say everyone should go read Jeremy Carl's new piece at the American Mind called Trump's Great Communicators. I don't know if I said this on the podcast, but I certainly have said it privately. When Trump was picking a lot of his cabinet officers, it was interesting to me that he seemed to think that one of the highest and best uses of a cabinet officer is as basically head of comms for a department. And that it's clear that this White House is taking a heavy hand in staffing the professionals and policy people under what is essentially a group of great communicators, as Jeremy has put it. So he puts a little meat on those bones and puts it down as a flag for us, as a marker of sorts for us to continue to keep an eye on. I thought it was an interesting case, and it will. I think Trump is right in a certain sense. Cabinet heads, cabinet secretaries, especially in the last 10 years or so, are really one of their huge roles is as sort of managing, being the head of the comms operation out of their department and in support of the larger agenda of the president. And I think it's glaringly obvious in many ways in which the Biden administration neglected that core function. Just think of the famous picture of Lloyd Austin in like a face shield, a mask, and his suit looking like some sort of decrepit or special needs Darth Vader on the tarmac somewhere abroad. And you kind of get the gist of it.
Okay, I got one. I love this. I definitely think we should start recommending stuff again if the audience wants it.
Yeah, and we can roam more widely across culture and everything else. Yeah.
Okay, nice. Well, I think Mike is going to join me in this one if I'm not mistaken. But the TV show Severance on Apple TV.
Yes.
If you've not seen it, okay. So this came out, I think, like just pre-COVID, the first season, and it was one of these high concept shows that if you like sci-fi, this was just catnip. So it was pretty good. In fact, I would say it was like very high level stuff. The concept is they've split your brain in two so that one half of you only remembers your work life and one half of you only remembers your home life. And obviously it's a metaphor for like 10 different things at once, including work-life balance, including like corporate America. But then they take this concept and they just embroider it with this extremely distinctive mythology and an aesthetic. Like this is a show that has an aesthetic sensibility all its own, which is so refreshing compared to like most TV has now become indistinguishable. Every opening sequence looks like the little twisty turny geary things from Game of Thrones. It's like none of that is in Severance. This is clearly a very precise artistic vision. And then it went dark because COVID hit and the show did well, but everybody was like waiting and waiting and waiting. One of my favorite critics said she was like a sailor's wife gazing out at the sea, waiting for the second season to come back. And now it's finally back, and it genuinely like transcends kind of, even its previous successes. It's such a smart show. It has a lot of, as is now kind of the new dispensation, it's got a lot of like digs at corporate wokeness and the insincerity of that. But it's just a really smart show, and it has that characteristic that the show Lost had, where you're like, can they possibly land this plane? They keep dropping all these hints. We're all just like waiting to see if they actually know what the story is about. They claim they do, and I actually am more confident in this one than I was in Lost that there is actually some reveal coming. But it's not too late. It's a very bingeable show, so catch up on Severance because it's just like terrific. And then that Bill essay.
And interestingly, it's a project of Ben Stiller's.
That's right. Yeah, he's producer, director, I think.
Yeah, director, producer, I think both. Yep.
Let me just add, as long as we're talking about Severance, that I'm pretty convinced that they ripped off the entire premise of Severance from the author Delicious Tacos, who you may have seen.
No way, really?
Yes, because Delicious Tacos has a short story based on this idea that people turn off or turn on their brain when they go to work or whatever. And it's got a very clever twist, and it's a really good short story. And I think they just like totally ripped it off. I'm not sure, but this is a plug for Delicious Tacos. He's a good writer.
Huh. Another show I'm watching, Severance. Yes, Spencer. That show is unbelievable. There's just it just levels all the way down. I mean, it's just one thing after another. You think you've got it, and it's just one more thing happens. The twists are fantastic. The last episode of the first season was probably one of the best kind of cliffhangers end of a season of a show I might have ever watched. I mean, it's probably top 5. It was done so well. Another show I'm actually going back to watch, this was from 2015, Wolf Hall, which is about everything going on within Henry VIII and his monarchy, and going through Anne Boleyn and then Jane Seymour and all the machinations with Thomas Cromwell, who became his advisor. He was formerly Cardinal Wolsey, But then Wolsey did not approve of the divorce and then the marriage. So Cromwell then came over to Henry VIII. I come to find out they're actually doing a second season. It actually aired on the BBC, I think it was just last fall, and it's actually starting on PBS Masterpiece Theater, I think in early March. So I was actually really stunned. I just happened to watch it again for the second time and found out, oh, wow, they're doing a second season, which is based, I guess, on Hilary Mantel, I think her third book in the series, which is the final book. So I'm very much looking forward to watching this new season. Mark Rylance, Damian Lewis. So it's got fantastic cast and just very, very well done.
Sweet. Yeah. R.I.P. Hilary Mantel. Those books are great. I haven't seen the show, but we'll totally check it out. Okay. And I guess one more plug for Bill's piece in CRB. Go to ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com and subscribe so that you get that piece when it comes out. And that's it for us this week. It's all the time we have. So in addition to going to ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, you can go to AmericanMind.org to read Jeremy's piece that Ryan mentioned and a bunch of other great daily stuff. If you want to know more about the Claremont Institute and the work that we do, the easiest way to do it is to visit our website at claremont.org, and you can donate to support us at claremont.org/donate, which we mightily appreciate. You can also check out our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. Big thank you, as always, to our production team, the brothers G, Jake, and Ryan Gannon. Don't forget to rate, review, share, subscribe, do whatever you do. Send up a smoke signal, attach a transcript to a carrier pigeon, however you get the word out. Really appreciate it. And that's it for us this time around. Thanks all of you for listening, and we will talk to you next week.